And as always, I love to improvise in music and in life. So we'll go off on a few tangents today, as we like to do, but the main topics for today that we're going to delve into is elitism in music and how this thought virus is a huge block for many, many people. Then we'll also be getting into a term that I coined myself called Voice Dysmorphia, talking about the voice, one of the most mysterious of all instruments, as it's the most connected to who we are. And we'll talk about how we can use a vocal practice to heal our self-image. And we'll also talk a little bit more about this song, How Can I Keep From Singing? This is my new theme song that I'm developing. And we'll talk a little bit more about where I'm at in its production and give a bit of a background to its history. So let's go ahead and get started for today. This is Lyndol Descant, and we're going to talk about music as a metaphor. So last week, there was a couple of things I wanted to correct before we really get started. In our discussion last week, I had mentioned diving into some of the history of how wars have been funded and how there's been, you can sort of track the funding behind some movements, even though it seems like it's just random. There's been a lot of research done by some great researchers to track where you can go back to one source for all the funding. And I had mentioned I just sort of randomly said about the Skull and Bones, but specifically I was talking about Anthony C. Sutton's work. He has America's Secret Establishment, but it wasn't so much about the Skull and Bones itself, but just showing an example of when you really research the funding behind or the connections behind some movements, how it could possibly all really truly go back to one family or one organization. So I just wanted to mention that. The other thing I wanted to mention is that we had gone over the 4 stages of growth last week as it pertains to adults. It's a really good discussion because I also got to bring in my own observations from over 15 years of teaching. And I've always loved teaching adults because I myself was an adult music student, and that the psychological component is very important for adult students to be realistic about and aware about. It's a big part of the journey, is overcoming some of the psychological obstacles to learning an instrument as an adult. Everybody says it's easier as a child, and that's true, just from a brain softness. That's not quite the right word, but the ability, the way that our brains are get more hardwired when we're older. And so there is some truth to the fact of it being a bit harder to learn languages or learn music as an adult. But I would say that's much less of an obstacle to the psychological blocks that people have. So I just wanted to mention that the name of that book that I got that out of was Own Your Authority by Marissa Santoro. She has 4 stages of growth that really apply to anything. And so in that discussion, which all previous episodes are on my YouTube, Lyndol Descant, and there you'll find that discussion from last week that's really great for adults that are learning an instrument, thinking about learning an instrument, and just an interesting discussion about learning new things as an adult, right? So that was Own Your Authority. I believe last week I called it Authenticity. So those are the 2 corrections I wanted to say before we got started. But what I'd like to do now is jump into one of the psychological blocks. Now, this one is not just for adults. In teaching music, I have come across a great number of blocks that students have to face to get through. And one of them that I don't hear being talked about a lot is elitism in music. What is this? Well, this is a phrase that I've sort of come up with to explain this idea that I had, and that I think many people have, that only the special people should do music. And it's really a waste of time for the rest of us. Now, this is a very modern viewpoint because 100 years ago, it wasn't practical to think that way. If you wanted to hear music, you needed somebody locally to play it. You even needed somebody in your very own family who could sit down at the piano if you wanted to hear music. This is before radios. And so, yes, there were special people that were traveling around and, were maybe known for being more talented, but it didn't keep the average person from learning music and to learn to play to a quite decent level because they wanted to hear music in the household. They wanted to hear it on a local level. So it just wasn't practical. Well, ever since the advent of radio and then the ensuing cultures that have come, more and more people have given up music as a universal skill that humans have. At least I can speak to the Western countries, America in particular, given up that notion and sort of thought that it's a waste of time. Like if you're not talented, which you would discover when you were young, if you're talented or not, and if you're not, leave it to the skilled people, leave it for the special people, right? They were born to do this. Now, I think there is, going hand in hand with this, is this idea, I know I used to think this way, that the people that do rise to the top, they are the cream of the crop. So if I was really special at music, I would almost be like predestiny. Like I would somehow find my way into the public arena because it was just, that's the way that it worked, right? That people who had a gift to offer would somehow get brought to the forefront, be put in front of the audience, find all the support they needed. And it's because they were that good, right? If you were that good, you would just find your way there. It would just happen for you very naturally because in society, we want to promote the best of the best, right? So the cream would rise to the top. But I now realize after spending many, many years in the music industry and in New York in particular, that that's a very naive perspective. And naivete seems to be widespread on many attitudes or belief systems. And it's something that we sort of have to confront if we're really going to grow up and be adults. So the truth is, from what I've seen, and this is my opinion and my perspective, but you can take it from somebody who spent over a decade in New York as a full-time musician and music teacher, that the music industry doesn't operate that way. Have you heard about the P. Diddy lawsuit that's come up recently? Now, I don't know much about it. I don't really want to get into the details of it because I really haven't researched it. But from what I hear, it's sort of that idea of, what George Carlin say, like there's a big club and you ain't in it. And that is what I saw many times when I was in certain circles, that there was gatekeepers and there was ways to go to the next level. And many times it really did function from a place of like, how much did you want it? How willing were you to do anything to get this, to go to the next level? And in New York, oh my gosh, one of my favorite parts about it was that everybody was talented. Everybody was. It wasn't a question of like one guy standing out in this local scene. I mean, everyone was talented. Everybody had something unique and special and something to say. Many of us had come to New York because we did believe in our music and we wanted to share it and we wanted to look for opportunities. So what made the difference, between the ones that sort of stayed on the local level and the ones that got the breaks? Well, in my opinion, it wasn't as happenstance as it might appear. And Mark Devlin is a music researcher who's done a lot of this research. And I'd love to get into more specifics. But sometimes when you really look at some of the big bands that I'm talking that everybody knows, they have very interesting connections. So yes, nepotism is certainly part of it. Connections, certainly part of it. Being willing to do whatever it takes is part of it. Okay. So in my opinion, who does get and who rises to the top then? Well, it's a lot of people who maybe don't have scruples, They might not have morals like the average person has. They might have been willing to do things that the average person would never, ever dream of doing just for a break or just to have fame. And it also makes a certain type of musician that is really looking, finds fame to be that important. Out of all the virtues in life, over companionship and family and integrity. Their own fame reign out over all that, their own desire for success. That is a certain type of person, right? And that's going to be a certain type of music then. Because as we've talked about, music is vibration. So where somebody is coming from, who they are, what their intention is for playing music makes a big difference. So what I think is the hardest thing is watching, average Joe, good Americans just worshiping people that I don't think deserves their admiration. They are thinking the same way I did, that this person is so, so, so talented. And it's very, very easy to look at somebody who's talented and think, wow, they're incredible, and sort of elevate that one trait over like their character. But I believe it was Robert Doisneau, who's the famous Parisian black and white photographer. He did a lot of very romantic couples in the 40s. And he had said he's not worried about finding another great photographer. He's worried about finding a great human being. And that's what I think has happened to a lot of our art and a lot of our music, is that it's very one-dimensional. They are very talented. They are very technically proficient. They have the ability to keep your attention. They have the ability to stick in your head. But we'll talk a little bit more about how a lot of that also comes from the support they get, the teams that they get involved with, right? But are they really good people? Is this who society is raising up as the type of people that we should be calling our heroes? And it gets a little twisted and a little bit weird when you hear the backstories to some of these people. And I remember I have some really dear friends, really, really, they go to church every Sunday. They're such kind-hearted, good people. And then they're going to these concerts of people that really are doing, the kind of music that to me is a huge turnoff, like just low energy, based, what kind of mess. It's like they're not even thinking about what really is the message. It's just fun. It's just fun, and it's just entertainment. And because of that, that's that naivete. There you go. That's that naivete again, just sort of thinking, oh, this is just fun. It's just lighthearted. It's just, it's just what I like. And they're not thinking past that. And they're not thinking about music and its true power and its true form and the effect that it can have on you. And so that's one of the sad things. I think that society as a whole in America, our taste in music have really dropped, and we don't realize how much we're just sort of liking the music that's given to us, rather than cultivating our taste in music and really seeking out good music, which is still out there. There are still so many musicians out there. And I think that the criteria of what they're looking for needs to change. Technique is important. We don't want to hear somebody who's not a great musician. And it is hard to have great technique if your whole life music has sort of been a side gig for you, which for most it is, right? It's the very lucky few that have been able to focus 100% on music. And for sure, when you can do that, you can transcend and go to deeper places with it. As I discussed last week, you can get to that unconscious mastery stage. It takes many, many, many hours, and it's just not possible to get there when it's always been a side gig. That's why people who are smart enough to really work on an instrument when they're young, they do have a leg up. Because as you become an adult, it is harder to find that time, and it's harder to get those hours in, and life is kind of stacked against you. But if you're willing to seek it out, there are still some really amazing musicians. Against all odds, they're on the local scene, still playing incredible, incredible stuff. And that's the kind of music I'm more interested in this point. It's a kind of music where maybe that person is a janitor, is paying for, a family of 4. And yet music is that important to him that he's kept it a priority, has learned to practice, gets his bandmates together, gets out there to maybe be paid like maybe $100 each, maybe. But they're doing it for the love of music, and they're doing it from a commitment level. Do you not recognize what different quality of music that would be? I mean, it's just, it's incredible. That rather than being celebrated and embraced by their local community, that they're willing to do that, even by their family and their friends, it's almost seen as an embarrassment. It's almost seen like, I can't believe they're still doing music. They're obviously not going to make it by now. Like, they're not going to be famous. Why are they still doing music? Like, it's so wild. We're so upside down. And I think a lot of it comes from this elitism idea, this idea that it's only for the beautiful, the talented, only for the successful. If you were really successful, you'd be one of those people. But the truth is, there's gatekeepers, and not everybody can get to that place. And there's so many talented musicians that will never be to that place, that the world will never get to hear from. And that's the real treasure on your local scene. Those are the really, that's the rare diamond, the hope diamond, if you can come across a musician like that. The other thing is that their egos aren't going to be there, and it's really going to be all about the music at that point. So I just want to reiterate that music is a basic human right and a skill. And it doesn't have to be the perfect music. It doesn't have to always be about a competition, right? You don't have to be the number one musician to play music or to have value for playing music. Music is something that's just meant to be there. The same way that people go out and they go dancing, and it's not about being the best dancer in the world. I really wish we could get back to a place where people just go out and play music with each other, play music on local scenes, that much more people would get involved with just doing music, because it's a human skill and it feels good to express yourself in this way. I remember when I was young, I quit piano when I was about 13, mainly because I had it in my mind that if I hadn't been discovered by then I probably wasn't that talented. And my music teacher did think I was talented. She did tell my mom that. I thought it was BS just to keep me in piano lessons to get paid, because I had heard that Mozart was already composing at age 5. I was writing some songs, but my teacher kind of ignored them. She was classical and wasn't really interested in the little ditties I was making up, even though I think it was quite, something that could have been encouraged, and something I would encourage at this point. Because not everybody wants to make up songs, That's not everybody's love. It was mine. I loved making up songs, but I had a defeatist attitude that since I hadn't been discovered, I might as well quit. And it wasn't until many years later that I found out that Mozart had a dad who pushed him to 8 hours a day of practicing music. He never had a choice. So from the time he was like 3, maybe even younger, his dad was training him for this because it was very profitable. It was a career choice his dad wanted him to make. And he had very high aims for him. Okay, this is the story that I've heard. Correct me if I'm wrong. And because of that, he was able to reach those levels. Because of that, he had his focus, right? So people don't recognize that there's oftentimes more that goes on with somebody advancing to a music career. It's, people in place, a parent. I've heard some of these musicians have been told since the time they were young that that's what they were going to do, and that they were trained for it, and they were given all the opportunities for it, and they were ready for it, right? And so don't be hard on yourself. Don't count yourself out the way that I did. It was such a shame that I did that to myself. I was just such a young kid, stupid kid. I needed more adult guidance on that subject, and should have consulted, more with others about it to see like that's not realistic. And these are the type of unrealistic expectations we put on ourselves that talk us out of our dreams, that talk us out of developing our talents. So keep that in mind. There's more to talk about that subject. I mean, honestly, could talk about that subject all day long. And we'll come back into it. But for now, I just want to say that it's worth your time to start to seek out the musicians that might be around you, the musicians in your family, the friends. If they're still actively playing music, maybe you could help to encourage them. Because I do believe that arts need to be nurtured by the society around them. And if all of us are just saying, well, let's just, Let's just listen to Taylor Swift and she's got it, right? We don't need any more musicians. Let's not have anybody. Let's not have variety. Let's just have Lady Gaga and Taylor Swift because they're just so amazing and nobody can weigh up to them. Well, that comparison isn't fair because they have tons and tons of people working with them. They have nothing but time and resources to put towards their music. So listen in that way. Listen for the potential in the musicians that you know in your local scene, in your personal life, and try to give them encouragement. And if you're one of those people, then I'm encouraging you that you're probably not being fair to yourself. You're probably not being completely fair about where you're at and where you can be. And so, I just want to encourage you to keep going because music is a basic right for every human being. And we're a healthier society when we're playing music. And when you play music, not only are you contributing to the vibration, higher vibration coming from a sincere heart, not being somebody that's just doing it for your own glory, but just doing it for the love of music. But you're also going to hear music better and your own taste in music is going to go up, right? And we need that as well. So that being said, I'll close out that topic on elitism in music, but I'm happy to talk about that more and would love to hear any comments or feedback on that subject. I do consider it a sort of mind virus or a thought virus. So if this whole conversation is irritating you, then look into yourself, see if that sort of brings up for you, and I'd be interested to see. And that moves us into our next topic quite beautifully. This is another term that I've coined myself. It's called voice dysmorphia. Okay. And so we're going to sort of switch gears and talk about the voice. The voice is something that I've taught a lot because I'm a singing pianist and I've done all combination of piano or piano and voice, choirs. I've worked with the voice a lot. And the voice is an interesting instrument because it's internal. And so when I was in my 20s and I was in a lot of the jam band scenes and it sort of skirted on the edge of jazz, there's a lot of notion that the voice isn't really an instrument, right? That the human voice is not an instrument. We'll talk a bit more about why that they would say that, but I will say I don't believe that. I think the voice that's an erroneous, diminishing, limited way of thinking of the voice. It's possibly the most amazing instrument because it's inside your own body and you're so connected to it and it's so intuitive. I firmly believe that we all have the ability to sing just as we all have the universal skill of music. It's just that many of us, number one, don't develop it. Number two, there's many blocks against using it. And nowhere is this more true than the human voice. The human voice is basically like having a mirror held up against you. And this is where I came up with the term voice dysmorphia because I saw it over and over and over and over again in my students. It didn't matter how old or young. It didn't matter how accomplished even. It was there in varying degrees. I can maybe name on one hand the students out of 500 to 1,000 students. Maybe 5 of them were completely clear of this. And in some cases, these students were on the spectrum, the ones that were clear of it. So most people had what I call voice dysmorphia. Well, what is this? Going to body dysmorphia, we all know what that is, right? And I'm just going to read the definition of body dysmorphia. It's the bizarre and delusional condition that leads to bulimia and anorexia. The precise definition is as follows. Body dysmorphic disorder is a mental health condition in which you can't stop thinking about one or more perceived defects or flaws in your appearance. A flaw that appears minor or can't be seen by others but to you is magnified. You may feel so embarrassed, ashamed, and anxious that you may avoid many social situations. Okay, so we're all familiar, especially since the 80s, with body dysmorphia. And, most of the time this is in, I think, teen girls. A lot of young teen girls, at least when I was young, dealt with this. I can only imagine it's gotten worse with social media. There's also another brand of it, and that's with sort of rich elderly women who are getting obsessed with staying young, and they go to such extremes with their plastic surgeries. And in some cases, body dysmorphia can go the other way and they actually see themselves as looking good. I mean, there's a distortion there, basically, right? And so what it is they're not looking at reality. They're not able to look in the mirror and see a true image of themselves, accept themselves for their flaws and their attributes. They're just not able to do it. And this is exactly what voice dysmorphia is like. Very few people can hear their voice and really hear what it sounds like and really be objective about it and not be overly sensitive or insecure. And I'm going to specifically speak to the singing voice because that's really what I've the most experience in. But I'm going to go ahead and postulate that it does apply to the voice at large. And most often what would happen is one of the biggest pitfalls for singers when they come to me is they want my feedback. They need my feedback because when they sing, there's such a vulnerability, and it's in part due to their own poor assessment of themselves, right? Just sort of scouring their voice for all the flaws, not hearing it. And they know that on some level that they're not hearing it objectively, and they want my opinion. So it's very important that I offer a lot of sunshine to them because just like plants, just like anything, in order for that voice to grow, it needs sunshine, it needs sunlight. And most are incapable of doing that for themselves because instead they're only hearing the flaws and they're blowing up those flaws, like putting a magnifying glass on the flaws and then almost ignoring the beauty or the expression completely. In some cases, even when I'm bringing up that beauty and expression, and I truly give honest feedback. I've never wanted to just give false data or false information, even though at times, you really want to encourage somebody. I always look for truth to encourage them with. And it's really honestly, in most cases possible because most people do have a unique and interesting singing voice. And I can hear the potential. And on top of that, I can hear that it's out of shape. So I can see where it's going to go and sort of help to pull those attributes out and try to magnify those for the students. But voice dysmorphia will make it to where they're almost annoyed with that. They don't believe me the way I didn't believe my piano teacher that I was good at piano or I was talented. I just thought there were ulterior motives. Same thing. I mean, voice dysmorphia can get them so agitated that they don't believe me when I tell them that the positive side to what they're doing. And in many cases, I've been impressed. And there's a lot of times when it wasn't, technically there was issues, but I got chills anyways, because I could hear, it's just so wonderful to hear anybody singing sincerely in a room with you. I mean, my job is, I'm so lucky in that way, getting to hear the human voice and getting to hear so many people sing. And from such a sincere place, that's not overproduced and auto-tuned. But voice dysmorphia ends up being a really big block for a lot of people because, to be honest with you, typically when somebody comes to me for voice lessons, and I would say like 75% of the time, they're stepping into, singing voice, they're coming back from a break, and there's a period of about 2 months. Even if they've been at a certain level, they're ready to go to a next level where you need about 2 months of sort of giving yourself time to work up to get to that next level or get your voice back in shape. And in that amount of time, I'm always trying to encourage them to not be taking the temperature constantly of their voice, to not constantly be listening, trying to, was that good or was that bad or was that good or was that bad or I'm a good singer or I'm a bad singer. That's the tendency of the overactive mind. But the voice does so much better in a safe space. It can open up so much more. And the voice, going back to the mystery of it, it's not logical. Like the voice can be different every single day. And it can be so frustrating for students when they, are trying to control it. The voice is so much more about allowing. And so that 2 months can be critical. How much is the student giving themselves a safe space for that voice to show up and grow and feel safe enough to be present and to be heard? And if you're coming in with just constant bam, 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 this is bad, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad, the voice you'll never reach your full potential. You'll never get to hear what your voice really sounds like, right? So it becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy, this voice dysmorphia. Oh, yeah. It's honestly one of the hardest parts about my job, dealing with that, because I've seen it rob people of the joy of singing so many times. And at the point where I was teaching music, and in particular the voice, at this point I wasn't super critical on my own voice. I had gotten to a space with my voice where I had the courage to share it. I've shared my story a little bit on Music as a Metaphor and on some of my YouTube channel that I was very, very shy of singing up until maybe my late 20s. And so I did have voice dysmorphia to such a degree that I wouldn't even face it. I wouldn't even hear it. I would sing by myself in an unself-conscious way, but the minute that I got in front of somebody, that that evaluation, that analytical mind would step in and basically just shut my voice down. I literally couldn't sing. And I know many people experience this where they have a singing voice in the shower or somewhere else, but they try to sing in front of somebody, or they have maybe been practicing for a while and now they try to sing in front of an audience, and literally the voice will shut down on you. It's wild. I mean, that's what an interesting, fragile, finicky instrument your voice can be, because it's so psychologically responsive. And so at the point in my, late 20s to early 30s, I had worked a lot on opening that voice, and I was able to really come from a place where I could share my voice. I really didn't worry about my voice. I remember always saying, I just want to be like Willie Nelson. Like, I want to have a unique sounding voice. It doesn't have to be the best voice to me. I don't really even want it to be too technically perfect, because my taste, for better or for worse, were more kind of like dirty country blues. I didn't really like that, operatic or overly classical sound. And even a lot of jazz singers were sort of too polished for me. Now, my tastes have changed a little bit, but back then that was how I felt. So I really wasn't that worried about my voice. I really wouldn't have said, oh, I have voice dysmorphia. And maybe you could say I'd come out of it to a large portion. But when I look back, the reality is it still was there lurking in the shadows. Even when I was teaching and performing regularly, it betrayed itself in one way. I really could never listen to voice recordings that I did. So it's a very common, well-known fact that listening to yourself, listening back, is a great way to improve your music practice. Because in the moment when you're playing, even an instrument, but even more so with the voice, when it's inside your own head, you really can't hear it objectively. So listening back is one of the ways to try to hear it more objectively. Well, the problem is voice dysmorphia can distort that even so, okay, even though it's a recording. Number one, because voice recordings, they're not really how you sound in real life, right? Nowadays, it's good because it's probably how you're sounding coming through a digital medium, if that's what you're using to share your music. But let me take a little sip of water here. Ooh. Speaking of the voice. So, let me see. Let me catch my thought there. So when you're sharing your voice via digital medium, hearing recordings is maybe a more accurate assessment of how you're sounding to others, but in general, your voice dysmorphia can still distort that. And that's what was happening to me when I would do a performance. I would try to be professional, listen back to it. And when it was out of proportion. Like, I would be able to come up with pages and pages of what I did wrong. And I just couldn't really flip my mind. I couldn't think about the things that I had done right. I couldn't see that the overall performance was decent or good. I really couldn't come to that conclusion. And so it would greatly jeopardize the confidence that I needed to get back on stage for the next performance, sometimes the very next night, sometimes the next week. So I ended up avoiding recordings altogether. And I knew, it was in the back of my mind, I knew that in a way it was inhibiting my growth. If I had been able to listen to those more, I probably would have been able to, expand and grow even more. But it felt like it would jeopardize my ability to get on stage at all. And that's what I'm talking about. Voice dysmorphia can be that much of a deterrent for people. I've seen more than one person, just want to quit completely because of their assessment of their voice. And it's one of the reasons why I have to be very careful about using recordings with a student. I really have to sort of know them, know how well that they're able to take in. And for many students, it's more the medium to advanced, or it's like once every now and then for some of the newer students, because I run the risk that that it will discourage them, that they will do what I did and only hear the negative and won't be able to hear the positive. So I'm very careful about that. And to drive this point home, personally, when I would hear, and I've seen this happen with my students too, let's say that I did a recording 5 years ago and I haven't listened to it since then. I come across it today and I listen to it. I'm 9 times out of 10, I've been like, wow, this is actually pretty good. Like, I actually like this. This is great. And I can give myself positive reinforcement. And it's the same recording, 2 completely different emotional reactions to it, 2 completely different evaluations. How do you explain that except that it's my psychological state, right? It's the fact that maybe I was so vulnerable right after performance, and that vulnerability made me too focused in on it, made me magnified in on it, and I couldn't see the big picture. And with distance, it's like that objectivity came back, because it's almost like it's not me singing anymore. Like 5 years ago, time and distance gives me the ability to be objective. And it's like, okay, that's pretty good. I'm pretty proud of it. Trust me, I still hear flaws all the time. I've never produced anything that's been absolutely perfect that I haven't found like, oh, I wish, that's there. But it doesn't inhibit the overall performance or the overall result, which is exactly what dysmorphia does do, is it just sort of distorts the perception. It makes you feel like your voice isn't good. And it almost goes back to that elite, same kind of idea of the elitism. Like you don't see the point in singing because you just don't see any value to it. You can't see any value to your voice. Seeing people diminish the value of their voice is just one of the saddest things in my job. As well as maybe the worst is when somebody is a self-fulfilling prophecy and their critiques are so harsh that their voice actually shrinks and goes the other way. It doesn't grow, it doesn't get better, which is just the human skill is the more you sing, the better you are, okay? Truthfully, the people that have what I would say the most pleasing voices, the most universally like agreed upon, like, wow, that's a great voice, they're the kind of people who just sing all the time. Some of them have had voice lessons, some of them haven't. That's not the common denominator. It's the fact that they're just people who sing all the time. The more you use your voice, the more that it grows, the more that you're in tune with it, the more you learn things. And that's way more important than any lesson, to be honest with you. And I, have had some singing lessons, but most of what I've learned with my voice was just by singing, But the thing that voice lessons is important for, one of the things, there's many things that voice lessons are helpful with, but I would say getting over dysmorphia is a big part of it, because you need external feedback. You need external validation. You're not going to be able to see your own growth for a while. Now, when somebody's continually pointing it out to you weekly or bi-weekly or monthly, whatever your lessons are, maybe even every now and then, that feedback is invaluable because you'll intuitively know that it's right? You'll intuitively believe it, unless your voice dysmorphia is to such a degree. You'll intuitively know that it's right. And you'll begin to believe it. And that sunshine will help to grow those aspects too. And then you'll start to notice those things more in your own voice. One of the things I tell my students a lot is don't worry about how you think you sound. Think about how it feels in your body. Because singing is one of the most wonderful things to do. And it really doesn't matter how you sound. From a certain level, how many of us, really are going to have professional careers as musicians? I mean, trust me, like with elitism in music and the monopolization of it, you're probably not going to make a super ton of money unless you've got some good connections. But singing is valuable nonetheless, and it's something that can improve your entire life. It's something that can improve your community when done in community. And it doesn't matter how you sound. It doesn't matter how many flaws. It matters how it feels in your body. And that's how you'll know, because good singing technique feels good. It really does feel good in your body. And like, for example, when I'm nervous driving, I always sing. It just calms me right down, right? When I'm out in nature, I'm singing. It feels euphoric. I mean, singing is just like I said, it's a universal human trait. We all can do it. We just get so caught up in whether or not we can sing that we block ourselves. And that dysmorphia, let me talk a little bit more about what singing lessons can do for your voice dysmorphia and for dysmorphia in general. Because my firm feeling about this, and this is just my theory, is that it's a reflection of your own self-image. So music is a metaphor. You hear your voice and you don't like it, right? And my conjecture is that this is also how you feel about yourself, right? Many of us, most of us, maybe all of us, have traumas that we're trying to heal. And these traumas have locked us into low self-esteem, bad self-talk, poor opinions of ourselves that really aren't fair, but we're locked into them. Now, many of us, to function, have learned to sort of bury all this stuff deeply in our subconscious, and we really don't see it. And we might feel like, hey, I feel good about myself. I have good self-esteem. Maybe I'm out functioning in the world, and I'm a mom, and I'm a business owner, and I have confidence, and I'm doing all these things. Well, now you have a chance to really see what's lurking in your shadow, right? When you get into singing lessons, or you start singing, you're like, oh, but I have a terrible voice. Oh, I can't stand the sound of my voice. Oh, I can't stand these recordings of my voice. Well, that in some ways is a reflection of a misperception, right? It's a reflection of something that maybe you need to look at and bring to the light of consciousness, and have a music teacher say, music as a metaphor, like, hey, you're not really looking at the real you. You're looking at a distorted you. You're looking at through a distorted funhouse mirror at yourself, and it's not actually reality. Because in truth, that's what trauma does to us, especially as little kids. It gives us a very distorted image of ourselves that isn't true. And as adults, we have to work that back out. We have to be the adult to ourselves and kind of say, hey, you did the best you could in a situation. You don't need to be that hard on yourself. Or, hey, this anger or this guilt, right? So much of us carry guilt, or really the worst that I think it can be, the worst is shame. So many of us were in situations that we took on all this shame, and it has to be faced at some point. And voice lessons is a very safe space to do this, because when we're facing our own voice, these things can come up. And that's what I really think is behind like body dysmorphia and voice dysmorphia. It's definitely something psychological going on. And in particular with the voice really is such a representation of who we are. It's a sound of who we are. That if we can look at that in the mirror and say, hey, maybe it's not as bad as I think. I'm going to bring it to the light of my own consciousness. I'm going to hear all this critique I have, but I'm still going to see the good. I'm still going to say overall, there's something valuable here, and I'm going to keep working with it every day. It can transform right before your eyes. It's not work that happens overnight, and I'm not trying to replace any psychological work you might need to do. But sometimes the healing can come, and this is where music is so powerful, by taking our shame or taking our shadows and turning them into something beautiful. And this is what can happen in your voice lessons, in your singing practice. You can do this for yourself too. It's easier to have an encouraging music instructor, but sometimes you only need that for a little while, and then you can get the momentum going. But every day, year after year, you're singing, and slowly your voice is just growing and coming out, and your relationship to your voice is changing. And there's still days, like I said, it's like the ocean. The ocean can be clear one day, and then there's waves one day, and then the next day it's calm. And, so your voice can be reflecting even the emotions that are coming up in your day-to-day life, but it's such a safe space to become aware of them and then to heal them. to turn them into something beautiful, express them, accept them, and then express them. And then be able to come back to this equilibrium of like, but I'm valuable. I have a beautiful singing voice. I have I have a unique singing voice. I have a voice to contribute, and I'm going to contribute it. And that's what I've seen happen over and over again in voice lessons. And I'm happy to say that's what happened to me. Because, it's been a very long journey for me, for sure. And that last phase of voice dysmorphia, it was sort of lurking in the shadows of just not being able to hear my own performance. I started, when I recognized what that was, I started listening to my performances and listening back. And the truth is, I don't even think about it anymore. I just did it today. In fact, I listened to the recording from last week when I did that live vocal performance for How Can I Keep From Singing? And guess what? Like, I didn't think it was perfect. I heard the flaws, but I didn't feel deep shame. I didn't want to go like hide under my bed and never do this radio show again. And that's the type of overreaction that voice dysmorphia, that's what needs to be faced. Because my conjecture is if you're having that about your voice, it's there for a reason. It's there because you need to face it and you need to heal it. And in the light of your consciousness and with the power of music, it's amazing what you can transmute and take your power back from. And I'm happy to say that that's the place I've gotten to. Like, I'm not overly self-conscious about my music. It just feels, my ego isn't all riled up about it. My identity is not all wrapped up, and I have a stronger sense of who I am and that my voice is part of me, but it doesn't have to be perfect to be valued. And the shame and the guilt that used to come up a lot, the unworthiness, I'm still facing these things. My voice is still different all the time. I'm sure there'll still be a day when I hear something and I'm just like, or in particular when I have I step up and I have a bigger opportunity. That's when some of these things can surface again. They can sort of get triggered again when I'm at a different level. I'm trying to go to a different level with music or with my career or bigger audience or more important opportunity. Those type of things can still trigger me. But for the most part, it's been cleared out. I can see that I've faced a lot of things, and that was a big part of doing music, is to have a practice that would help me to heal my emotional traumas and come to a place where I'm just who I am, not better than anybody else, not worse than anybody else, something to contribute like we all do, right? And so that's my thought for the day on voice dysmorphia. And if it's something that you feel like you can identify with, if it's something that you struggle with, I hope that this will offer encouragement that it's widespread, very common, and something that you can, I'm not going to say easily face, but you can face and get past. And if it's something that's blocking you from doing music, then I hope you'll get in touch, because I have a free 45-minute consultation where we can chat about some opportunities for you to work on that. It's something I'm really passionate about, something that I believe in. So that being said, I want to skip back and talk a little bit about that song I did last week, How Can I Keep From Singing? So I wanted to give a little history on that song. This is a song that is an old hymn. And I had heard it from Enya, which, if you guys aren't familiar with Enya, Enya, she is one of my favorite people. From when I was really young, I used to listen to her a lot. She's a very unique voice. I really don't listen to her much anymore, but when I was in my teens, she was a huge impact on me. She's an Irish songwriter, and I always thought this was her song, How Can I Keep From Singing? And I found some sheet music from a long time ago that I was trying to learn and pulled it out. And then I recognized, and I looked it up, and I realized this is a hymn. And what it is, let me see here. So Pete Seeger actually made it popular in the 60s, but let's back up and say a lot of people think it's a Quaker hymn because of that, but it's not. It's a Christian hymn, a folk song. The original lyrics were done by somebody named Pauline T. And the original tune was composed by American Baptist minister Robert Lowry. So yeah, a lot of people think it's a Quaker hymn because I think that when Pete Seeger made it popular back in the 60s in the folk scene, he erroneously said it was, but it's not. And it's they know this because they looked in like all these hymnals, and the Quakers just didn't really have it. It didn't really seem like that popular of a song in the 1800s. It was in the Seventh-day Adventist in the 1908. That's the earliest that they found it. The interesting thing is that Paul Seeger changed the lyrics a little bit. We had talked a lot about the lyrics last week when I basically did a live vocal performance to it. So what happened was I want to develop this song as my theme song for this show, because the words are just, how can I keep from singing, is I love it, right? When I'm really in line and in tune with my soul and on my path and doing well, I really can't keep from singing. And that's where I aim to be, 100% of the time. Trust me, I'm not there 100% of the time, but that's where I'd like to be. And there was, as we went over the lyrics last week, there's a lot about the lyrics that I really, related to right now. And most of the lyrics are the same, but he sort of de-Christianized them a little bit. Even though he was a Christian and there's Christian lyrics in them, he changed a few lines like, what thou my joy and comforts die, the Lord my Savior liveth. Whereas what I sang was, while though the tempest loudly roars, I hear the truth it liveth. Right? And then later in that same verse, it's the original is, since Christ is Lord of heaven and earth, how can I keep from singing? And this is, since love is Lord of heaven and earth, how can I keep from singing? So there's some changes like that to be done. And I think there can be an argument. I mean, I know that there's many people, and I think it is true, that it's become much less socially acceptable to sing truly Christian songs in public. It's I know for myself, especially after being in New York for a very long time, it's almost like you feel that you're offending people and they can take it as a form of aggression if you come on too strong with your belief systems, your Christianity. But I also understand why that's the case, because being raised in Texas, as a Catholic, I actually had a lot of evangelicals coming at me, and it really was a turnoff. Like, it didn't help at all. If anything, it sent me the other direction. So I don't want to be lukewarm. I want to be able to be honest about my voice on things, but I also believe strongly in connecting with people and coming from a place of love and acceptance. And so I actually like some of the changes. I actually like that it says, since love is Lord of heaven and earth, how can I keep from singing? Because to me, that's still true. It's not untrue. But I think that's something that could be debated, right? And I just wanted to mention that since we had gotten so deep into the lyrics last week. But to change gears, I listened to my vocal performance. And so one of the things that's happening is I'm still working out a lot of technical sides to doing this show. And what I had done last week was, due to where I had to be on a stationary, like a large computer to connect, I didn't have my keyboard near me. So I sang to the backing track that I was creating. And that backing track just had the piano. It just has the piano. It hasn't even been an edited piano. It's just raw piano set to a metronome. But when I sang it for you, I was slightly displaced off of the rhythm I heard. And so that made me wonder if it was a delay in the actual, playing from my computer and then singing at the same time, because there are delays that ensue with this internet radio. So I don't know if that was the case, or if I just didn't quite hear the music and was singing a bit off. I don't want to give an excuse for myself if my rhythm just was kind of off. But these are the kind of things that, when I go into production, which I'm hoping to do like fairly soon, I would use a metronome, right? And in particular, there was this one part where I go out of tempo. The whole thing was in tempo. But at the end, I go rubato. So I sort of give dramatic pause. And if you don't give, that's difficult if you do the tracks at different times. I'm a singing pianist, so that's no problem when I'm playing together, right? It's like I know exactly, I'm in sync. But if you're syncing with other instruments, rubato can be a little bit trickier because you have to feel it. And when you're recording, since I did the track ahead of time, what I would probably do is look at my actual tracks because I can see where they're coming in. And so I'd be looking at the track itself to know when to come back in. The funny thing is, I didn't have that. And that was a part I was sure was going to be off rhythmically, but it was the opposite. It felt like the rest of the song was kind of like a slight delay. I can't remember if it was a little before or after. I think it was a little before. And then that part, somehow I got it. I don't know how that's possible. That's a perfect example of how like you never quite know what's going to happen, and letting go of control and just allowing things, and never expecting it or even wanting it to be perfect, but just wanting it to be good enough. There's so much to be said for good enough. So the going forward, for my production, I think the next thing I'm going to do, and maybe I'll have it done by next week, but I do have a lot of recording projects this week to do, is to add in some violins and cello and the singing and go ahead and do the vocal on the actual recording. So I'm building it out as a theme song for the show, but then I'm also going to release it as a Friday video, Friday night premiere. So you don't know about my Friday night premieres. I do a song every week on YouTube, 8 p.m. Eastern. And some of them are like, my singles. I do have a bunch of well-produced singles that I'll be releasing coming up this spring. Other times they're rough drafts, set to just images. Like last week I did just a song that I did on my piano one time. She's in love with the boy Trisha Yearwood. And then I had been out in Texas and just wanted to put my photos up. So I did a photo essay to that of small town life. And so every week it's something different, but it's designed to uplift your frequency, bring you some good content, make you think, inspire you. So this Friday, if I get this done in time, I'll be putting this one up, How Can I Keep From Singing, or next Friday. But I also have some other ideas for some music projects, including ZZ Top. I'm going to do a ZZ Top cover I'm so excited about. And I'm also, I just have work because I also compose for an organization called Songs of Love, where we offer customized songs for children who have medical needs, as a healing and an uplifting music medicine. So I have some deadlines for that too. So we'll see how much I get done. But in the meantime, I want to offer, if you need a custom song, I am in that business. Or if you're a songwriter, composer, pianist, singer, interested in some voice or music lessons, then get in touch with me through my website. That's www.lyndol.com, Lyndol. This is a call to musicians out there with good hearts who, want to use music to uplift themselves,